Well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and good night to everyone in the call. My name is Vlieger. I'm chairing this session together with my co-chair, Frank Weichold from US FDA. It's a real pleasure to have you all in this virtual meeting. Clearly, Clinam is best face-to-face, but this is second best and a wonderful program put together by Beat and his colleagues. Let me start and introduce this session to you. What is, as Margot nicely mentioned, the plenary session starting at 5 p.m. at the 13th Clinam meeting. So today we have heard a lot around what the pandemic has done to humankind around the world, how science has helped us to make great steps into that direction, what challenges we have in making available the different mRNA vaccines around the world for everyone in an equal phase, and a very interesting talk on the ethical aspects around science in general. Today, we are closing the conference with this session where we bring together all the aspects from the previous sessions and we focus on the worldwide developments. There's one world, so the global developments in the field of nanomedicine, non-biological complex drugs, because that's where Clinam is famous about, the nanomedicinal products. And we focus on these complex drug products, including their follow-on versions. And depending where you are in the world, these are either follow-ons, these are similars or generics. And I think that's also one of the topics we will have a discussion around today. The question, of course, is after all of these years and all of these discussions and these developments, are we closer to regulatory alignment? We have an exciting program today, and it's important to realize that, of course, there's a good reason why we have these discussions right now. We have seen a tremendous increase of complexity of drug products due to the technology developments we've seen. So technology advances, and so advances the complexity of our medicinal products. So we've seen biotechnology really arranging a lot of interesting biological complex products, while nanotechnology and other synthetic technologies are making advanced medicines. And those products are clearly different than the ones we've seen in the past. And that challenges us as scientists, it challenges us as experts. And of course, we all need to realize that only by science, we will not bring a medicine to our patients. There's a lot of things that are needed to be discussed, and including a very important role of our regulatory agencies around the world. So all of these agencies, and this is just an example of a number of agencies, they acknowledge the complexity around these technologies and the medicines they may produce. So the agencies here are actively engaged in discussions around complex drug products, and they're issuing guidance, they are opening public consultations, and just to mention a few on this slide, definitely not exhaustive, but there is a lot of debate ongoing. And I'm very proud today that in this session, we have a number of these agencies from around the world showing what they achieved over the past years and how they look forward into the future to collaborate with each other, with the scientific community, to address some of the key challenges that we are facing as a nanomedicine community. So without further delay, I'm going to introduce to you the topic and the speakers of today. We will start with a very real-life example of a question why harmonization is needed in terms of drug product regulations. It's from Paolo Rocco, University of Milan. Then we'll have 4 presentations by regulatory agency experts. So we have Sarah Abraham joining us from US FDA, sharing the generic drug development and bridging global regulations. We then move to the European side of things, where Kevin Blake will join us, Senior Officer of Clinical Pharmacology, to explain what EMA is doing in the field of nanomedicines and nanosimilars. Then to the lower part of the world, in the middle of the night currently, from Anne Field, where we will hear around the TGA's approach, Australian's approach, to the NBCDs and the similars. And then we move back again to US FDA, which I think has spearheaded the nanomedicines guidance, finalized last week, at least the final one published last week, where we'll hear from Wenlei Jiang on the complex generics containing nanomaterials, developments over the past 2 years. And as a good ClinAm habit, we will end at the end of the session with a lively debate in the other Zoom environment. So we will move as speakers to the other Zoom room, copied in the link for a lively discussion. During the presentations, everyone can list their questions in the chat, and I will try, together with Frank, moderate those questions during the session. And if we will not be able to touch upon all of the questions, please move and join us into the live session and debate. We'll take it from there. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Paolo Rocco. Paolo is working at the University of Milan and has a very interesting background in chemistry, physics, and now moved a bit more to the legal part of the discussion. Paolo has presented and published a number of interesting papers and high impact papers on NBCDs and how these are regulated worldwide. Paolo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. I'm going to share my slides. Okay. So, case of today, why authorization is needed, and we will take Glatiromer Acetate as a case from reality. But let's see what are the steps to harmonization. We need to define and classify a class, and then we need a centralized assessment, and then through harmonized guidelines, we can also arrive to international harmonization.
Sorry.
So, yes?
You just cut your camera, and you have to switch the presentation. You have two screens. We don't see your presentation.
Okay, I'm sorry. How's it going?
No, it doesn't work.
Well, I'll do it again.
Dawn, can you unshare your screen?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying, but I lost the control screen. Here we are. Stop sharing.
Ah,
Okay.
Very nice.
Oh, okay. So
It's fine. Thank you.
thank you. So first, we want to start with the $1 million question. What is nano? And easier question, what is a non-biological complex drug? And if we need an ad hoc or a case-by-case classification and regulatory framework, and then centralized assessment, which in the EU means decentralized procedure, while in the USA it is already settled with the centralized assessment by the FDA, and then international harmonization, which can mean a convergence between competent authorities. And we have taken some steps towards this direction already for many products, and also lately with the parallel scientific advice. The problem of harmonization is both for originators and follow-on products. In the first case, we need an homogeneous guarantee of quality, safety, and efficacy, and also to allow reduced data duplication and overlap, and also regulatory uncertainty for companies. And in the second case, again, homogeneous data requirements, and also a comparable time to market of the copies in different countries. This can be the beneficial effects of harmonization. So as John was saying, we have these small molecule drugs and biological products, which have not the point in focus today. And then we have non-biological complex drug, which is a very heterogeneous category, being comprised of a product based on complex APIs, complex formulation and complex dosage forms, complex routes, and also others. So it is too heterogeneous to be regulated together. For biological products, they have their own regulation with biosimilars, and a part of that, the so-called biotechnological products, and we may include also advanced therapy medicinal products. They, by their nature, have the centralized procedure, but the centralized procedure can also be for other medicinal products for different reasons. For example, because they have an innovative API and a specific therapeutic indication like AIDS, cancer, and other pathologies, or for orphan drugs. But there is nothing to say that non-biological complex drugs must go through the centralized procedure by, of course, their nature. So we can hope to find a subcategory, a subclass of non-biological complex drugs, which could be the nano category. And here I mean nanomedicine or nanomedicine products, or nanodrugs or drug products that contain nanomaterials. Every country has its own name for this still. And if we are able to get a usable definition for nanomedicine, I will call them nanomedicines for short, we can hope to make them in the European Union into the mandatory centralized procedure by their nature. So another adding a 0.1x1 of regulation 726 of 2004. But let's take a step back and let's focus on one particular example of complex API, and let's see why harmonization is needed. And I'm taking Glatiromer Acetate, which was placed on the market in the USA as Copaxone in 1996, and then in the European Union with a mutual recognition procedure in 2000 and 2003 for different formulations, the 20 milligrams per milliliter, and then the 40 milligrams per milliliter later. It is a synthetic polypeptide analog of myelin basic protein. It is actually a copolymer, okay, because it is a random sequence of these 4 amino acids, which is not entirely random, but it is a very heterogeneous mixture. The exact mechanism of action is not fully understood, and also the peptides responsible for the therapeutic effect have not been really identified. When it came to placing on the market a copy of or follow-on of Glatiromer Acetates, the USA and European Union followed 2 different pathways. In the USA, it was an abbreviated new drug application, but with this API sameness defined by a product-specific guidance, which was based on 4 points, which are the fundamental, the equivalence of the fundamental reaction scheme, the equivalence of physicochemical properties, the equivalence of structural signature for polymerization and depolymerization, and also of biological assay results, which are as a confirmation to these successive refinements. Well, this briefly, I won't go into detail in this, just the average molecular weight and the molecular weight distribution of Glatiromer Acetate, and the fact that the chain is not entirely random, because by the fraction of the different amino acids in solution and by their intrinsic reactivity, in fact, we have a sort of more abundance of some amino acids in the beginning of the chain, and then this changes by a somewhat somehow predictable pattern. And then we also have some preferentially cleavage points during the depolymerization phase. So the FDA approach is based on this, and then on the physicochemical characterization and biological assays, so they can arrive to use an abbreviated new drug application. In the European Union, things went differently. But we must say that our generic application is a little less flexible than the ANDA in the United States. And we have a particularly focused application for this kind of products, which is the hybrid application for medicinal products that do not fall in the definition of generic, and in general for which the bioequivalence approach cannot be utilized. In this case, even if it was a mutual recognition procedure, the company placing on the market the follow-on product asked to the EMA for recommendation, and the EMA recommended that a clinical trial be performed, and it is the GATE clinical trial, which is in essence a comparability study between Copaxone and Glatiromer Acetate follow-on, and also then bridging study from the 20 milligrams to the 40 milligrams dose have been performed. So we see two different approaches to the development of copies in the US and the United States, maybe not so different as it may seem, but very different in philosophy, let's say, and in the presence of clinical studies. That's a big difference. So we must ask if we want to go in the risk of unnecessary costs with more data and or risk of poor benefit assessment with less data, we must find, of course, a balance between the two. And these are two balances that have been found, very different, but again, functional. Let's see what it does mean in practice. Okay, we have seen only two steps. Okay, one step, the type of application. Then we also must think of what happens next, interchangeability and then replacement policy. And so we can have product that can be interchangeable, non-interchangeable, automatic substitution, or the switch decided by the prescribing physician. In the case of small molecule drugs, we have one path generally for the follow-on products, for the generics. The generic application or the ANDA application, they are considered interchangeable and go into the Orange Book in the United States, while in the European Union, this is decided locally and by the national competent authorities, and they usually go into automatic substitution. For the biological products, we have the biosimilar approach, both in the USA and in Europe. Of course, I am talking about these two regions because it's the ones I know. And also, if they, from many competent authorities, are considered interchangeable, not by the EMA, which doesn't take this kind of conclusion, then the switch automatic substitution is decided at the local level. In most cases, it is not an automatic substitution, but nothing prevents it to be. And let's see the case of non-biologic complex drugs. So you can see, this is why harmonization is needed. Too many uncertainty. Some of them can go to the traditional generic approach. Some can go through the generic approach with the product-specific guidelines like Glatiromer Acetate. Some can go into the hybrid. By hybrid, I mean the hybrid application in the European Union, but also the 505(b)(2) in the United States can be here. And then if they go to a hybrid, they have also this choice between interchangeable and non-interchangeable. And also there is some uncertainty about the policy, about the replacement policy step. If we think of a nano category, a nanomedicine category, things get a little simpler, but not very much still, because we could think of a nanosimilar pathway, which doesn't need to be a new one. It could be the hybrid of the 505(b)(2) already existing. And so we at least take away some part of this uncertainty, but then all the other things are still in discussion and still to be seen. So there are some open questions. And first of all, the nanomedicine definition, but I leave this to other speakers from the regulatory agency, which I'm curious to hear about this. And the only dimension counts, or we must take into consideration also all the complex properties which make a regulation necessary. And then this is my question: do really polymer drugs and Glatiromer Acetate in particular belong here by their nature? There is not really discussion on this. It is usually put into the category of nanomedicines, but there are some evidences for the two. We must ask where is the limit between a macromolecule and a nanomaterial? And then can we make all these categories and all the products in this category, and we must still decide how big it is into the centralized, into a mandatory centralized procedure. So if we have a class heterogeneity, like in the case of non-biological complex drug, we are forced to a case-by-case approach because regulating altogether is difficult. And this brings also a high cost of placing the medicinal product on the market in different jurisdictions. Nanomedicines can be a candidate as a single regulatory category and also as a new class to enter the centralized procedure in the European Union, which is a necessary step towards harmonization. And we are still, we have in the European Union some guidelines on nanosimilars, like for intravenous liposomal products, intravenous iron-based nanocolloidal products. We still need an overarching guideline on all nanosimilars. And we could think of a weight of evidence approach as it is used in the existing guidelines as a guiding principle that could work also for all nanosimilars. And by this, we mean that we start from quality characterization, define the critical quality aspects. And then from there, we build towards the non-clinical studies if needed. And then from there, we build to the clinical studies if they are needed. So this is my presentation. Thank you for your kind attention. Hope that I've been into the 20 minutes in the allotted time slot.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paolo, for an excellent introduction into the section. Actually, it was better than mine because you show with a concrete example of a product that was evaluated in the two different jurisdictions, what challenges it brings. And perhaps we already noticed that Europe isn't simply Europe. It's a European Union with different member states, and they all have their own perspectives to certain stories. But we'll hear later from Kevin Blake from EMA on the particular discussion. So we have one question already popping up, and I'm going to take it in between, Paolo. There's a question from Scott McNeil. And he thanks you for the informative presentation on the regulatory pathways, especially to the European one. And what he wants to know is whether there are also safety considerations to choose either for centralized or a decentralized regulatory pathway. Would you have a comment to that?
Safety considerations. Well, I mean, and it's not clear to me if we are talking about safety consideration about nanomaterials, but I don't think that is the question. If it makes a difference going from this decentralized to a centralized pathway. Well, we must say that once a medicinal product is placed on the market, even if it is without a centralized procedure, it must be safe and effective.
Sorry. You can just stop the screen share.
Oh, yes.
We don't see you. Thank you.
Okay, let's like that.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so I cannot see myself, but I trust you. No, okay, this is me. So I was saying, thank you, Scott, for the question. probably something is going to change, but the point of the centralized procedure is having the same assessment all over Europe. But we cannot say that if we are not in a centralized procedure, the medicinal products are not safe. We cannot say that. I mean, every competent authority places its basis, its assessment on the benefit risk balance. So the EMA can certainly gather together all the experts that are needed for any case. And so that is an assurance, but I mean, I cannot say, okay, that in the actual situation we have safety concerns, but yeah, I could think about it.
I think it's very clear, Paolo, and perhaps one of the keywords here is, but we'll park the discussion until Kevin has presented. It's also pharmacovigilance on a European level or national level, but we'll have a discussion and a debate later. Thanks, Paolo. I'd like to continue with our next speaker, and I can already see the first slide being shared. The next speaker is Sarah Ibrahim. Sarah is Associate Director for Global Generic Drug Affairs. She works with the US FDA, and she's going to share with us the FDA's vision, but also her personal vision, I hope, for the global generic drug affairs. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction. It is my pleasure presenting to you today. I'm Sarah Ibrahim, the Associate Director of Global Generic Drug Affairs, Office of Generic Drug Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, the United States Food and Drug Administration. And we inaugurate today's presentation by stating that this presentation reflects the author's personal opinions and should not be construed to represent the FDA's views or practices. The goal of this session is to present to you an overview of the Office of Generic Drugs Global Affairs program, particularly given the global nature of generic drug products, the impact of our global engagements, and an in-depth look at two of the most prominent international initiatives led by the Office of Generic Drugs Global Affairs program, the Generic Drug Cluster, as well as the Parallel Scientific Advice, and the vision to paving the path towards harmonization. Access to affordable, high-quality pharmaceuticals for the American people is one of FDA's public health priorities. We do recognize as an agency that generic drug competition encourages price reduction, therefore improves access to the American public. The FDA's generic drug program has continued to focus on ensuring that more affordable, high-quality generic medications are available in the United States. Now, as pharmaceutical innovation expands and evolves, we truly face significant global challenges in maintaining our high standards and dedication to public health. The American public expect high quality, safe, and effective medications, which is an equal expectation from a brand or a generic drug. The agency and the generic drug program's main goals are to ensure the quality, safety, and efficacy of generic medications, and to ensure that the approval is based on sound scientific and regulatory framework. The Drug Price Competition and Patent Term Restoration Act of 1984, commonly known as the Hatch-Waxman Amendments, was introduced almost 4 decades ago that created the current generic drug approval pathway. Generic medications prior to the amendment accounted for less than 20% of all prescription pharmaceuticals dispensed in the United States. Today, approximately 90% of prescriptions filled in the United States are generic medications. Now, generic drugs enhance patient access while lowering drug prices significantly. Now, to put this and give a perspective, currently brand name drugs account for just around 10% of prescriptions in the United States, but they do account for over 80% of drug spending. The remaining 90% of prescriptions in the United States are filled using generic medications. OGD's strategic and proactive methods to generic drug development and assessment continue to have a significant impact for patients in the United States and, in fact, globally. Now, this past year, the generic drug program approved hundreds of abbreviated new drug applications and thousands of application supplements. Our office prioritized the assessment of generic drug submissions for potential treatments and supportive therapies for patients with COVID-19, approving more than 75 original ANDAs and some in record time. Now, we additionally funded approximately $20 million in generic drug science and research programs, issuing 149 product-specific guidances for generic drug development, including 54 for harder to develop complex generics, to relay the agency's thinking on the most appropriate methodology and evidence needed to support the development of certain specific generic drugs. So in 2021, OGD's scientific and programmatic innovation supported our generic drug assessment work. For instance, we established the scientific foundation to support alternative bioequivalence approaches for several generic drug products. One such example is the novel in vitro BE approach that directly resulted in the development, assessment, and approval of the first generic difluprednate ophthalmic emulsion. Now, first, generic drugs provide required therapies for a wide range of medical ailments where there was no previous competition. FDA prioritizes the assessment of these product submissions due to their importance to public health. OGD approved 93 first generic medications in 2021, and some examples of those significant first generic drug approvals are highlighted in the table shown. Well, by exceeding the majority of our performance targets, OGD demonstrated its dedication to public health. And we have globally faced extraordinary difficulties in recent years. OGD has long navigated and negotiated a difficult and intricate global supply chain, with recent events further highlighting how sensitive the global pharmaceutical supply chain truly is. Now, in the next 10 years, the global generic pharmaceutical market is predicted to rise by more than $180 billion. The increased patent expirations, as well as government initiatives focused on reducing prescription drug costs, are expected to even further enhance this market growth. Now, the advancement of technology has resulted in more complicated medicinal products that provide a unique opportunity and a significant challenge as they approach patent expiration. Complex pharmaceuticals are distinguished based on the difficulties in assessing and establishing pharmaceutical equivalents as well as bioequivalence. The complexity of such specialized products does provide profitable opportunities that are inherently and intrinsically protected from extreme competitiveness. Generic companies aiming to develop these complex generics are heavily investing due to potential benefits of generating these complex generics. There is a general consensus on the significance of a harmonized international regulatory requirements for complex generic products and an understanding of the challenges that lie ahead. It's without a doubt that globalization of generic drug development compels a more harmonized generic drug development process and the convergence of technical requirements among different regulatory agencies. The FDA has been commended and applauded for its pivotal role in safeguarding Americans from ineffective products. And the FDA is well-resourced, knowledgeable, and extremely capable, but we do recognize the importance of coordinating with our regulatory counterparts to eliminate duplication of our efforts and to promote regulatory decision-making consistency. We're dedicated to fostering global harmonization of scientific and technological standards in the creation of generic pharmaceuticals. Now, the necessity of having a clear global policy and strategy led to the establishment of the Global Affairs Program within OGD. OGD recognizes the importance of its global presence, and the Office of Generic Drugs established a Global Affairs Program, which I lead, to ensure a strong FDA voice and impact, to promote high level of quality culture and standards. We as an agency hold products intended to be used domestically to equal regulatory requirements, regardless of their source. We are proactively navigating the landscape and identifying emerging international regulatory changes. We're engaging with our regulatory counterparts and stakeholders to facilitate FDA's domestic mission of assuring safety, efficacy, and quality of FDA-regulated products. Now, common standards for global development for generics can improve access to generic medications, and ICH is uniquely positioned to develop harmonized recommendations, thereby expanding the anticipated convergence. FDA strategically leveraged ICH reform initiated at the end of 2015 to propose the generic drug initiatives. Now, the ICH Generic Drug Group, or GDG, was established in 2019 following the endorsement of the ICH reflection paper, Further Opportunities for Harmonization of Standards for Generics. Some of the key proposals in the ICH reflection paper outline a strategic approach for developing and enhancing ICH guidelines to support the harmonization of scientific and technical standards for generic drugs. These guidelines include tools for demonstrating equivalence or bioequivalence for non-complex dosage forms and more complex dosage forms of products. It does propose steps and recommendations for global harmonization of standards for generic drugs. The reflection paper focuses on harmonizing scientific standards for bioequivalence that can be used within the existing regulatory frameworks. The work for GDG paved the path for the development of ICH M13 Expert Working Group that represents the first topic since ICH reorganization that is specifically focused on the generic medications or generic medicine industry. M13, titled Bioequivalence for Immediate Release Solid Oral Dosage Forms, is the foundation for establishing the safety and efficacy of immediate release solid dose generics. And the scientific harmonization of these studies would allow bioequivalence studies conducted worldwide according to common expectations, thereby increasing efficiency of the generic drug development process. And this is expected to be finalized sometime this year. Now, in recent years, we have continued our efforts in promoting harmonization of evaluation criteria for nanotechnology products via engagement with IPRP Nanomedicine Working Group and the Global Bioequivalence Harmonization Initiative conferences. And extensive scientific engagement has allowed some level of scientific alignment. What I do want to highlight is our 2021 Global Affairs developments. 2021 was a significant year for OGD Global Affairs program with the launch of two momentous initiatives, the generic drug cluster, as well as the parallel scientific advice. FDA is involved in a number of partnerships and collaborations with regulatory counterparts designed particularly to streamline procedures for bringing new products to market ambitiously in multiple regions. The Food and Drug Administration fosters partnerships with counterpart foreign government agencies and international organizations, and we utilize confidentiality commitments that establish a legal framework for the FDA to share non-public information with FDA counterparts. This inspired and led in June of 2021 that the OGD Global Affairs program launched the generic drug cluster, creating a unique opportunity to increase the scientific alignment between leading generic drug regulatory agencies, paving the path for understanding complications that occur during the life cycle of the product and determine the gaps needed to achieve regulatory convergence and coherence on a global level. It can be the predecessor to understanding the shortcomings and limitations of generic drug regulatory harmonization. In establishing the generic drug cluster, we established a unique platform for knowledge and information exchange on emerging and trending issues. So the generic drug cluster has a long-standing history of quite consistent and significant performance. There is still an opportunity for generics to expand, particularly that generic products with low to no market competition. We understand that generic drug products have a significantly high market penetration rate that reaches as high as 80% in the United States and 70% in Central and Eastern Europe. Many of these markets have remarkable volumes of penetration that range anywhere between $20 to $60 billion in innovative sales that will be going off patent soon. Now, generic companies as well face varying difficulties and challenges to their profitability and growth, particularly dependent on the product category they're intending to develop. And we understand that complex generics still represent an underutilized, and I quote, underutilized savings for US patients, with a significant number of important complex products that are off patent but lack generic competition. The number of complex products going off patent are only increasing, and regulatory agencies are prioritizing efforts to encourage generic drug competition for complex generics, offering potential for industry to develop such products, ultimately lowering drug spending and enhancing patient access. Recognizing the potential patient benefits, significant cost savings to the healthcare expenditure, and realizing the challenges and difficulties of developing complex generics that reduce the competition in comparison to non-complex generics. Now, overcoming the challenges of complex generic product development requires close partnerships between industry, academia, and regulatory agencies. Development of a robust regulatory framework that facilitates pathways to market access and patient protection. Research and investment required to create that regulatory framework should address areas of need. And these research advancements may help generic product applicants rely more on alternative methods, reducing unnecessary human subject exposure. The extensive scientific exchange of information enabling accelerated product development with stakeholders and streamlining the regulatory requirements, and going a step further, clarifying the divergent regulations with our global regulatory partners and encouraging developers and manufacturers and providing necessary channels of collaboration. Now, as I mentioned, the formal ICH procedure is a stepwise procedure that consists of numerous steps, from consensus building, regulatory consultation discussion, finalization, committee adoption, to regulatory implementation. The path to global harmonization starts after regulations have been established and is a rigorous process that requires an assessment of regulatory differences, scientific and technical negotiations, and creating bridges across our already established regulatory requirements and expectations. Now, OGD Global Affairs recognizes that prospective harmonization efforts, while regulations are being established, particularly for complex generics, strategically bridges our regulations. So the generic drug cluster to date has focused on creating a global dialogue that bridges the gaps for complex generic drug approval, identifying key differences among regulatory agencies regarding the approval of complex generics, aspects hindering fast approval of complex generics, and extensive sharing of case studies and experiences with complex generics that allows relative consensus regarding an understanding of the approval standards between our regulatory agencies. Now, as I mentioned, 2021 was an active year for global affairs. And while the cluster focused on exchange of information amongst regulators, another program launched to create additional channels of communication with industry. European Medicines Agency and the United States Food and Drug Administration have established a pilot program to provide parallel scientific advice, or the PSA program, to applicants of marketing authorization applications for hybrid products and abbreviated new drug applications for complex generic drug products. The PSA program provides a mechanism for EMA and FDA to concurrently consider and jointly exchange with applicants the agency's views on scientific questions during the development phase of hybrid and complex generic drug products. The PSA officially launched in September of 2021, providing the necessary advice, the necessary scientific advice early in the development stage that would allow for better designed studies to generate robust data. And given that the dialogue is between these two agencies, we can protect patients from unnecessary clinical studies that would fail to provide useful evidence if pursued and presented to agencies. The effective guided development allows the optimal use of resources available and consequently access to patients for life-saving and beneficial medications. The PSA program is voluntary, and in order to participate in the PSA program, applicants are required to submit requests to both EMA and FDA. The PSA program focuses on sharing information and perspectives between applicants and both regulatory agencies. Now, candidates for the PSA program include product development programs that may benefit from the PSA process by potential harmonized approaches. For each PSA request, the agencies will hold one trilateral meeting with the applicant focused on the specific development issues raised by the applicant. And enrolling in the PSA program is applicant driven. And what an applicant should focus on is developing specific scientific questions involving the development of hybrid or complex generic drug products for which the applicant desires to have further scientific input from both agencies concurrently. Now, the PSA program or process is divided into 3 stages. Stage 1 is the PSA meeting request, where applicants are encouraged to focus on and develop specific scientific questions involving hybrid and complex generic products for which the applicant desires to have further scientific input from both EMA and FDA. Submission does not guarantee that the PSA meeting will be granted, and only after an applicant's request for a PSA meeting is not granted that the applicant is free to pursue a scientific advice procedure with each agency individually. Now, the second stage, which is the meeting preparation, starts when both agencies have granted the applicant's PSA requests, and applicants should submit a draft meeting.
Well, that sounded very serious on Sarah's side. Let's give her a few.
It sounded like fire alarm, actually.
Fire alarm.
Yeah, that could be happening in the building, and of course they make a significant noise. So I apologize in case that is happening at campus in Silver Spring.
Are you safe, Sarah?
I guess there was a connection issue. Apologies for that. Should I continue? Am I back
please.
Online?
Yeah.
Please go.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so I will start with the second stage. So the meeting preparation and conduct starts if both agencies grant the applicant the PSA request. And applicants at that time should submit a draft meeting package to EMA and FDA, after which the applicant will participate in a trilateral PSA teleconference with EMA and FDA, which usually is scheduled 120 days after the applicant submits the full meeting package. The final stage, or stage 3, is the post-meeting agency communication. After the PSA process, each agency will retain its individual regulatory decision-making regarding drug development and marketing applications. The advice of each agency may still differ after the joint discussion. Each agency will provide the applicant with independent advice on the questions posed during the PSA meeting, according to usual procedures and timelines of each agency. Now, participation in the PSA program shouldn't be construed to ensure any particular regulatory action on a marketing application by either agency. And of course, agencies will work to provide PSA responses that are convergent, or at least explain the reasoning and the rationale for any differences that do exist. Now, I always do finish my presentation with highlighting that our opportunity for convergence and harmonization is now. And the path towards common standards for global development for generic products can improve access with substantial healthcare savings. We do recognize that products with small markets may not be economically sustainable or viable unless markets can somehow be aggregated through such convergence efforts. And the massive investments in development of particularly complex generics can be supported and cost mitigated by entrance into multiple parallel markets. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for a very clear and strong overview on the importance of prospective harmonization of guidelines towards complex generics. And I also like to congratulate you, Sarah, and the FDA on the tremendous efforts over the past years. We've been following this very closely over the last decade, and so much has happened in the complex generic drugs area. So that's really exciting to see. Sarah, one question maybe. I was very excited to see the parallel scientific advice being announced. And of course, as a community member, it's always interesting to see statistics on things that you can share. Will there be a point in time where you can share the number of applicants, the number of successful things that went through it? How does such a thing work?
It's a great question. With everything that we do launch as a pilot, we have actually initiated a process to assess the success. So we are monitoring and developing methodologies and techniques to assess the success of this particular pilot program. Now, if you follow closely the PSA for the new drug side, they recently have given a talk with the 5-year PSA update from the new drug side. And we do anticipate that we will be sharing very similar information regarding our PSA program for the generic drugs as well.
Wonderful. I'm really looking forward to see such a presentations, because I think it brings a great opportunity for the developers, for the patients, for the scientists, and also for the regulatory agencies, of course, to really work together on such an important topic. With that, Sarah, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the debate in the next session with you as a key participant.
There are no additional questions, John.
I'm sorry.
Frank? There are no additional questions for Sarah, so
okay, then we'll take it in the debate. Well, thanks so much, Frank. Let me continue with the introduction of our next speaker from the European Medicines Agency. Our next speaker is Kevin Blake. He's a translational science senior specialist in the Translational Science Office at the EMA. And also, most importantly, he's part of, he's a scientific coordinator in the advice office with a focus on procedures relating to the generics hybrids. And I think that's one of the topics, of course, that has been very relevant today. Kevin will discuss the nanomedicines, nanosimilars as well. And I'm very pleased that you're here, Kevin. The floor is completely yours.
Thanks for the introduction, John, and also to say that both Paolo and Sarah have introduced topics that clearly I could have expanded on, but I will probably refer back to the issues raised in their talks as well. But as you say, today's topic is the approaches for nanomedicines and nanosimilars. And I guess to start in terms of a definition, in 2011, the European Commission published a recommendation on the definition of nanomaterial with the predisposing size as the critical factor. However, it acknowledged that an upper limit of 100 nanometers is not scientifically justified across the whole range of nanomaterials. And at the time, it was also noted the special circumstances prevailing in the pharmaceutical sector. And it was stated that the recommendation in itself, this Commission recommendation should not prejudice the use of the term nano when defining certain pharmaceuticals and medical devices. So
Sorry, can you put your presentation in full screen, please? On PowerPoint, yeah. Below on your screen, next to the minus, next to the zoom function, you have a little icons next to it. No. On the left, next to the minus, you have an icons where you can click. No, next to the minus. Yeah, this one, perfect.
Okay. No.
We shouldn't see the notes, but display settings, you can go on the top of the screen on display settings. And present view, yet it should be that. Click on this. Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So as I was saying, it probably allowed some flexibility in the definition, but it's just at this point in time, you know, a decade or so later, it is kind of a lack of necessarily a firm definition. But at EMA, what we have in terms of a working definition is that these materials are purposely designed systems for clinical applications, and at least one component is at nanoscale size. And this results in definable specific properties and characteristics. And these are related to the specific nanotechnology application and characteristics for the intended use. This would be the route of administration, the dose, and how the product behaves in vivo. And also it's associated with the expected clinical advantages of the nano engineering. For example, preferential organ or tissue distribution. So what all this means is that the nano development is really something that's kind of thoroughly thought through and targeted, and also needs to meet the definition of a medical product according to European legislation. In terms of the EMA's regulatory science strategy, which currently goes out to 2025, it's clearly remarked here on the need to develop understanding of and further regulatory response to nanotechnology and new materials in pharmaceuticals. And there is also the commitment to raise awareness of new nanomedicines and materials via the EU Innovation Network, and to foster collaboration with the European Commission and other international partners to share knowledge and harmonize regulatory practices. And in particular, these should focus on guidance addressing PK and PD requirements, and these include modeling and also long-term efficacy and safety, how this can be somehow monitored. Is also a focus on developing and standardizing new testing methods related to quality and safety assessment of nanomedicines, and also the need to understand the critical quality attributes of a given product and the relationship between these kind of quality parameters and how potentially differences within these might translate or potentially translate into differences in vivo behavior or biological activity. So it really is more about deepening the understanding of what this kind of nanoscaling means. To date, in terms of EU experience, there has been a number of kind of different nanoparticles authorized, and also we have seen reference to these products in either clinical trial applications or also in the context of scientific advice requests both at EMA level and also at member state level. And it's just from this slide perhaps to kind of draw, even with the relatively limited number of authorizations to date, there still is considerable variation in what might be considered kind of nanoparticles, ranging from the block copolymer micelles or nanocrystals, or the iron products, or indeed liposomes and the like. So in terms of regulatory expectations, and this is not a very full slide, but basically it's the context of the legal basis, which is underpinned by the 2001 directive, and then the evaluation of quality, safety, and efficacy leading to a benefit risk conclusion. And it's just to say that, as Paolo nicely presented, as things stand, there isn't really, there's no compulsion as such for nano products to go through the centralized assessment procedure at an EU level. Such a centralized procedure is compulsory for new active substances in certain indications, and also, for example, genetically engineered or biotechnology products. But as things stand now for nanomedicines, it's not compulsory, but it certainly is optional. And the optional scope of large indications, but perhaps most importantly for nano products is the concept of technical innovation, and also that a particular product is in the interest of patients. So if those criteria can be addressed, a request can be put in for eligibility for the centralized procedure, and thereby a particular product, if the request is granted, can go through the centralized assessment. However, it is still the case that a particular company can decide to go through the decentralized procedures. And we have examples where products can be almost in parallel going through, on one hand, the decentralized, and on the other hand, the centralized procedures. So separate to the kind of the regulatory base, there are other scientific challenges. Obviously, it's an emerging field. It's how to characterize these products, the analytical tools, and then how to kind of standardize. And as I said earlier, the link between the quality attributes and the in vivo performance. They're often developed by academia or small to medium enterprises, which isn't by any means a bad thing, but it just means that sometimes the people who develop these technologies may not have the experience that perhaps larger companies may have. And this can sometimes be an issue when kind of filing for a marketing authorization. Then there's the idea around the novelty of excipients, how these can be kind of assessed. And the ideas then around changes in manufacturing, any impact on safety and efficacy. And along these lines, issues with upscaling and transition to manufacture. Then there's the comparability relating to the quality. And also sometimes it can be for these products that they have to go expedited developments. And we have the recent experience with the COVID-19 products. So those are the challenges. And I guess in terms of the next part of the presentation, the focus is on how EMA can support developers. We do have, as Paolo said, we have some guidance documents, but these is not at this stage an overarching kind of guidance. But if the web page itself is kind of included in the slide here, but there are specific guidelines around liposomal products or the iron-based colloidal products. There's guidance on block copolymer micelle and also around surface coatings. And then just to highlight, we do have a product-specific guideline for liposomal doxorubicin, which has been published for a number of years now. But there is also a similar under development for amphotericin B liposomal, and this has just concluded a public consultation in March, and we have received very considerable interest and comment on the proposal during the consultation. So in addition to these guidances, we also have a kind of a number of kind of innovations or groupings at the agency to kind of provide support that's potentially relevant. And I won't go into too much detail on them, but particularly for kind of cutting edge developments, there's this concept of the Innovation Task Force, or ITF, and this is something that essentially it's an informal exchange mechanism between developers and EMA and the EU network at a very early stage in a product's development, where the focus is actually on what we call an ITF briefing meeting, and basically ideas can be exchanged and feedback sought on proposals in, as I say, quite an informal or non-binding manner. We also have the support to small and medium enterprises. We have an SME office here, and this is something that will directly kind of support applicants in terms of what's involved with potentially regulatory submissions and the like. And there are also advantages around fees, for example, for scientific advice. We also have the PRIME scheme, which is a kind of a breakthrough designation, or a kind of a potentially fast track procedure through the agency. And this again links a kind of early liaison with the agency and with the rapporteurs, and ties in with scientific advice, and is aimed at kind of streamlining the processes for products that are identified as these priority medicines. And then for the next, there is the CHMP, or scientific advice. There's also the option of scientific advice at member state level, but it's just to highlight, as Sarah has very nicely covered, the ongoing pilot with the parallel safety or scientific advice for generics and complex hybrids. But separate to that, there is the usual EMA scientific advice, which can be very helpful in kind of shaping a clinical development with a view to a marketing authorization. And then to emphasize the idea of liaison with international partners. And we have the international pharmaceutical regulatory partners, Nanomedicines working group. There's liaison with the Commission and the Joint Research Centre, and also a liaison with the WHO and the draft guidance. But otherwise, as again, as Sarah has said, there's the context of the generic and the kind of hybrid clusters and the like. So again, to emphasize the importance of such liaison. So in terms of conclusions, it is an emerging field and several products have been authorized in the European Union. Others are under development. And as I said, we're aware of these through clinical trial applications and scientific advice. We don't have specific overarching guidance at this stage, but there are some levels of guidance available. And it's just to say that there is support from regulatory agencies through the various schemes I've kind of very briefly outlined, but more information is available on the website. And again, it's probably just to emphasize how key interaction with regulators from the early stages of development is. And that is my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for again also a very good overview of all the activities the EMA is involved with on the topic of nanomedicines. I think equally, as I said to Sarah, the last 2 years also for EMA have been very productive, at least from an outsider on this topic. And the regulatory science strategy very focused on the nanomedicines, the nanosimilars, the CQA's discussion, and I think that could potentially be an outcome of these type of discussions we're having in these meetings. And I'd really like to congratulate you on that. And at the same time, there's an opportunity now in Europe because people are looking at potential revision of the pharmaceutical legislation. And this may also be a topic that is of relevance to the nanomedicines discussion, definitions, terminology, etc. And I think we'll get to that point as well in the discussion later on. Thank you very much, Kevin, and over to Frank.
Yes, hi, that is my great privilege to introduce Australia, who works for TGA, and she's been a leader in dialogue. Happy to have Anne program, the Nano program that was just mentioned by Kevin. But all of you who work in nano field know how important the IPRP is. So, and without further ado, please go ahead.
Oh, thanks very much, Frank. Yes, so I'm going to talk a bit about the perspective of a smaller regulator. I think we refer to ourselves as a medium-sized regulator. So let me progress my slide. Yes, so the TGA, Therapeutic Goods Administration, was established in 1990, and it's part of the Health Products Regulation Group in the Australian Government Department of Health. So we're the national regulator responsible for regulating quality, safety, and efficacy of therapeutic products imported into, exported from, supplied, or manufactured in Australia. And that includes prescription, OTC and complementary medicines, medical devices, biologicals, blood and blood products. And our regulation is underpinned by the Therapeutic Goods Act of 1989 and its associated regulations. This is a picture of our main office in Canberra. We're actually in the process of moving. We're going to have a brand new laboratory building, a new office. We're moving over the right in the process of it now. And we also have satellite offices in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Brisbane. So a bit about how we regulate. So our technical data requirements are based on overseas, those produced by overseas or major international regulatory counterparts. So largely the EU guidelines, the International Conference on Harmonisation of Technical Requirements, or ICH guidelines for registration of pharmaceuticals for human use, and guidelines issued by the Food and Drug Administration. And just as a brief note aside, where the EU guidelines adopted in Australia include references to EU legislation, including EC directives and regulations, these requirements are not applicable to evaluation of medicines by the TGA. And we have on our website a list of scientific guidelines that we have adopted. So just quickly, in terms of our definitions, which is relevant to how we view these complex products, a new prescription medicine basically contains a new substance that's not previously been included on our register of therapeutic goods, the ARTG, or it may be a combination with a new substance. And we also have, just briefly, biological medicines. We regulate recombinant products, plasma-derived products, vaccines, and gene therapy products as prescription medicines. And then we have a separate pathway for cell and tissue-based products, which term biologicals, and they have their own regulatory framework. So this is our legislative definition of a generic product. So basically, it refers to the substances being of similar quality to those used in a comparison medicine, which is the innovator medicine. Same pharmaceutical form, bioequivalence, and the same safety and efficacy properties. So we can have challenges if we're when we approve a generic medicine, if we are basing it, if the applicant is using an overseas reference product rather than the Australian approved and marketed product. However, we recognise that requiring such Australian specific studies to be completed may be an unnecessary regulatory burden. So we have a risk-based approach. For oral dosage forms or inhalation and nasal products, it's acceptable if the reference product is registered in and obtained from a country or jurisdiction that's considered to have a regulatory system comparable to Australia. So that includes the FDA, EU or EMA, Health Canada, Japan, Singapore, and miss some out, and the MHRA, of course. We do sometimes accept overseas reference products for other dosage forms depending on the complexity, and we're looking at FDA and EMA guidance on this. So we have particular challenges in showing identicality for non-oral reference products. And our biosimilars we regulate as new products, so they go through the pathway of a new entity. Our data requirements are based on adoption of a number of European guidelines outlining the quality, non-clinical and clinical data requirements specific to biosimilar medicines, and the ICH guideline on assessment of comparability. So again, a reference medicine must be a biological medicine that's been registered in Australia based on full quality, safety and efficacy data. The overseas reference medicine must be approved for general marketing by a regulatory authority with similar scientific and regulatory standards as TGA. So now looking at what we've done in recent years in terms of generic medicines. So in early 2019, we conducted a consultation on proposed reforms to the generic medicine market authorization process. And our consultation was basically we were concerned about reducing regulatory barriers for applicants seeking to register these generic prescription medicines whilst maintaining the standards of safety, quality and efficacy, but making the application process easier by making the regulatory requirements clearer and more transparent. So one of the aspects we consulted on specifically was on the use of overseas reference products in bioequivalence studies and these Australian specific requirements. But this consultation also raised the issue of generic versions of complex products. So we basically said that complex generics are more challenging to make, to test, and to establish bioequivalence to the existing medicine. We alluded to EMA and FDA guidance material and wanted to consider how our Australian regulatory framework could similarly evolve in response to such challenges. I'm just going to focus on the responses we received that actually addressed the issues relating to complex products. We did receive a total of 23 submissions. 14 submissions were for industry and regulatory consultants. We had only 3 published submissions referred to the complex products. But the issues that were raised as being of interest to these stakeholders were that the submissions, but the TGA processes for complex products needed to arise to the challenges in determining the critical quality attributes of the complex products. We also needed to consider the need for pharmacovigilance and for global alignment. There was also, obviously, our stakeholders wanted us to be more upfront in our publication of data requirements. And one submission also was urging us to consider implementing a hybrid pathway, which would be more, considered. They were arguing that this was more comparable to our comparable overseas regulators and would help ensure a harmonized science-based approval process that puts patient safety and benefit as a priority. So far, the progress we've made on these generic medicine reforms has focused on looking at reducing the Australian-specific guidance for simple low-risk products in terms of requirements for using an overseas reference product. So this has changed so that applicants no longer need to provide quantitative analysis of excipients for most solid oral dosage forms. And we've issued new guidance for this, and there's a flowchart and a checklist to help applicants determine what levels of evidence is required. So that updated guidance is published on our website. We've also introduced internationally aligned templates for summarising bioequivalence and biowaiver study data. This is a bioequivalence study information form, additional strengths biowaiver template, and the biopharmaceutics classification scheme system-based biowaiver template. So these templates are the results of collaboration with other regulators internationally and are equivalent to similar templates developed by comparable overseas regulators. And applicants are able to use the templates to prepare the bioequivalence evidence and reduce the risk of submitting incomplete dossier. And then finally, the other progress we've made is we've instituted a formal process for early scientific advice. Now, this is different from, we already have the ability to have pre-submission meetings with sponsors, and that is one avenue where someone who wishes to submit an application for a complex product could go down that pathway. But this particular process is giving us more specific advice, and in this instance, this is restricted to biowaiver justifications. So in vitro bioequivalence of an oral medicine in the first instance. And this actually required a change to our Act and regulations and was finalised mid-2020. So at the moment, we work on a fee-for-service basis, and so we had to change the Act and regulations to be able to do this. So while this is the only type of advice going through this process at the moment, we're hoping that we're looking at expanding it to cover other areas of early scientific advice. So I'm just going to talk a bit then about some of the experiences we've had in regulating complex products and their similars. So this table just gives some examples of some follow-on products that we have approved. So we approved a generic version of Calyx, as we call it, in 2013. And that was in the face of unavailability of the innovator medicine due to GMP issues. We've also approved follow-on versions of Sevelamer, in this case the carbonate, whereas the innovator was the hydrochloride salt. And more recently, we have approved follow-on versions of Copaxone or Glatiromer Acetate. So the first one we approved, the Glatiromer product, the Australian sponsor is Juno, but this is the Synthon product that was approved by the EMA, and Paolo discussed that. The data supporting that included the clinical trial data, phase 1 and phase 3 clinical trial data, as well as obviously quality data and some non-clinical data. But more recently, we've approved, I should point out that the Glatiromer product, at that time, we were unable to approve it as a generic through our generic medicines pathway. So it was actually approved as a new chemical entity. Whereas more recently, as we've developed more experience in regulating this type of product, the Viatris product, which is the Mylan Alpha Farm, has actually been approved as a generic medicine. And also, this was approved as part of an international work sharing arrangement under the Access Consortium, which I'm going to discuss in a little while. So, and again, just reiterating that our approach heavily relies on using overseas guidance documents and draft documents, in addition to the pre-submission meetings with the sponsors. When we can still face challenges applying these guidelines, they're often draft, and we don't know if updates have been considered, but obviously work with a lot of these international fora, including the IPRP Nanomedicines Working Group, is very beneficial for us. So in the last part of my talk, I'm going to discuss our use of the International Work Sharing Arrangement, or the Access Consortium. So this is a partnership between the TGA, Health Canada, Singapore, Swissmedic, and the United Kingdom. So basically, it's a consortium of a group of like-minded, medium-sized regulatory authorities. And it's been in operation since 2007. And the types of activities that are considered are collaboration on generic medicines registration, new active substance registration, post-market medicine safety, and development of technical guidelines. So this gives a little overview of, and the graphic actually refers largely to a new medicine. So the various modules that are submitted. Module 1 is the regional administrative information. There's a quality assessment, non-clinical, and clinical. And in general, we have 3 agencies are assigned different aspects of the evaluation. So there's a divided or shared review of the dossier. Information is shared via bilateral confidentiality agreements and memoranda of understanding, but we still have a sovereign decision-making process. So in a little more detail, again, this refers to a new chemical entity. We have a pre-submission process where the agencies will just collaborate and agree as to which agency will be responsible for which aspect of the evaluation. Agencies evaluate their own module 1. So that includes labels, GMP and risk management protocol aspects. Certain aspects of module 3 might be country specific. So for us, we have the TGA has therapeutic goods orders, which are TGA specific standards. Our own requirements for stability may differ because of differences in the climate in this country. And we may have different container requirements. We also have differences in pregnancy categorization statements and possibly differences in wording of indications. But the agencies develop a consolidated set of technical questions, and we interact throughout the review by teleconferences and sometimes also by email. So We've also been using this consortium. We have a pilot trial for using this for approving generic medicines. And it's based on Europe's decentralized procedure. So one agency will act as the reference regulatory agency and evaluate modules 2 to 5. And then the other participating agencies are concerned regulatory agencies. They will evaluate their module 1 and perform peer review. So again, each agency makes its own sovereign decision. And also there is an option for individual agencies to seek additional information and undertake further review. So I think, as I mentioned, the first product using this pathway was approved in 2017. And initially it was considered that this pathway would only be suitable for solutions and oral dosage forms. But based on the results of the first procedure, it was decided to expand it to cover all types of generic products or chemical products, not biologicals. And this would include complex products. And so the most recent approval of Glatiromer was the first case of this pathway being used for a complex product. So this is fairly recent experience. Health Canada was the reference regulatory agency, but in the end, there was actually a very close collaboration between TGA and Health Canada with equal input from both agencies, which enabled the more challenging aspects of the data assessment to be resolved to the satisfaction of both agencies. And I think both agencies felt that the net result gave them a lot more experience and confidence to enable them to come to an acceptable decision. So I'm just going to finish up by saying, what are the lessons learned from this work share, which obviously is one pathway towards global harmonization. Well, from our perspective, we have increased time pressures because we have to align our regulatory milestones between agencies. We have challenges due to time zone differences. We've been learning a lot about the different agencies, how they operate, how they distribute works differently to us and make their decisions. But certainly been enjoying the collaborations and learning about this, and we're really finding that the benefits are we have a larger and broader pool of technical expertise to debate these types of problems. We have opportunities to debate areas of contention and find common ground, and ultimately this will lead to increased regulatory harmonization. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Anne. Let me double check if you have any new questions. Of course, I closed my window right now. So, okay. Doesn't seem that we have additional questions, and it's very interesting. One of the things that you mentioned, you have developed templates for some of the processes. And I'm curious because at FDA, we often struggle with how we get the data in and how we capture the data and also use it in a context for similar in-class or related drug evaluation. And in a sense, we do not currently use what you would call smart templates. We essentially have to re-enter some of the information into either the global substance registry or parts of the primary, secondary, or safety pharmacology. Some of these important informations have to be reworked before they actually get reviewed. How do you deal with this in your agency? Is it all in smart templates and you have databases where you store it?
That's asking me something that I actually don't know. So these were developed in our quality area. I'm not in the quality area, but I can actually, I can't ask them now because they'll all be asleep. But
well, maybe we'll figure out at some point. But that's
yes, yeah. I think it's based on an international, some sort of international work sharing. So yes, I'll see if I can dig something out for you on that. But I think it's was based on the idea that just leading them towards, what information do we require? Basically. Just giving them better guidance as to what our requirements were. Disappointingly, I have to say, I was told they're not being used very much. So sometimes we do find when you're in a global situation, they may submit the same format as they had submitted elsewhere, and so we don't actually, they may be not reaping the benefit of it.
Makes sense too. Well, maybe we have some time at the end to discuss this, but let's go on to our next colleague and presenter. It's a great pleasure to introduce Wenli Yang from FDA. She is a colleague of mine for, well, about 10 years, having worked successfully shoulder to shoulder on some of the questions, also in the context of the IPRP program. And of course, Wenli is not a stranger to most of you. So please, Wenli, go ahead and tell us, what do you want to tell us? Wenli? I see the slide, but I don't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Actually, I want to turn on my camera.
That's okay. If it's complicated, just, speak. And
okay. Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, start my video.
There you go.
Okay.
Yes. There you are. Very nice.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Frank, for your kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Wenli Jiang. I'm from Office of Research and Standards, Office of Generic Drugs, CDER US FDA. It is my great pleasure to attend the 13th Clean meeting. I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to attend this virtual event. Actually, back in 2020, I gave a talk at Clean on complex products containing nanomaterials. So today, I'm going to provide an update on this topic. I will be talking about complex products containing nanomaterials developments in 2021 and 2022. Okay, so the views expressed in this presentation are mine and should not be interpreted as FDA policy. The concept of complex drug products was introduced in GDUFA 2 commitment letter. GDUFA stands for Generic Drug User Fee Amendment. Generic drugs are copies of brand name drugs. GDUFA provides user fees for FDA to ensure timely review of applications for generic drugs. In the GDUFA 2 commitment letter, FDA provided a list of complex products, including drug products containing complex active ingredients, complex formulation, dosage form, complex route of delivery, complex drug device combinations, and others. Here, I want to emphasize, in the context of GDUFA 2, complex products are the ones which present challenges for generic drug development. That is difficult to assess drug substance sameness and/or bioequivalence at the intended site of action. So in the past several years, FDA have been developing complex product classification criteria so we can standardize the complex product classification process, understand the complex product landscape, and prioritize regulatory research to support complex generic drug development. Here, I want to share you a good news. Actually, about 2 weeks ago, FDA published a manual of policy and procedures to communicate FDA's thinking and the process of classifying complex product. Actually, as shown in this slide here, any drug product containing a complex API, regardless of its administration routes and dosage forms, is considered a complex drug product. Any non-oral formulation dosage form product where there are often 2 or more discrete states of matter within the formulation is considered complex dosage form and formulation. Non-oral nanotechnology products fall into the category of complex dosage form formulation They include nano-sized liposomes, nano-suspension, lipid complex products, and other. Here, I want to clarify that oral tablets containing drug nanocrystals are not considered as complex product because conventional in vivo PK study can be used to demonstrate bioequivalence. Yeah, actually, today I'm going to provide a brief update about developments of complex products containing nanomaterials in 2020 and 2021. I will cover approval of ANDAs and NDAs, guidance development, GDUFA research, and global regulatory activities related to nanomaterials in these 2 years. Since 2020, US FDA has approved 7 additional ANDAs containing nanomaterials. Of them, 2 are doxorubicin hydrochloride liposome injection ANDAs. The first generic of amphotericin B liposome injection, ferromoxidil injection, and other ophthalmic products. In addition, more innovative drug products containing nanomaterials are coming these 2 years. For example, another ferric carboxyl maltose products at higher dose strengths, niraparib acetate injection, a cyclosporine emulsion, and sirolimus injection. As of product-specific guidance, we have 7 new draft guidance published and 2 revised draft guidances for nanomedicine products. You can refer to FDA product-specific guidance webpage for more detailed information regarding these newly published PSGs related to nanomedicine. This slide summarizes a list of research projects related to nanomedicine funded by Office of Generic Drugs, US FDA. Actually, we have 2 new projects related to characterization of iron complex products with University of Maryland and Purdue University. If you want to learn more about these research projects, I also direct you to the web link below about generic drug research related guidances and reports. Next, actually, I'm going to give you an example to illustrate how GDUFA research outcome is translated to product-specific guidance facilitating generic drug development. In 2013, OGD published a product-specific guidance for iron sucrose. This guidance recommends both in vitro and in vivo PK studies to demonstrate that the rate and extent of iron absorption of the generic iron sucrose product are equivalent to that of the reference product. For the in vivo bioequivalence study, a single dose, a randomized parallel PK study instead of a common crossover study is recommended, as iron storage and transport may be affected after the first administration. A long washout period may be needed to return to baseline. In addition, at that time, no analytical method is available to distinguish drug-bound iron, DBI, from other iron species in vivo. Therefore, it is recommended to measure total iron and the transferrin bound iron in serum. Considering the amount of other iron species are relatively low, drug-bound iron is estimated by subtracting the amount of transferrin bound iron from the total iron. So the bioequivalence is based on the maximum value of the difference in concentration between total iron and the transferrin bound iron over all time points measured, which is the estimated Cmax for drug-bound iron and the difference in AUC between total iron and the transferrin bound iron, which is the estimated AUC for drug-bound iron. So everyone can see this is not the best way to calculate PK parameters of drug-bound iron. What if we can develop a bioanalytical method to directly measure drug-bound iron and other iron species in vivo? In addition, a large number of subjects are required in a parallel study. What's the feasibility of conducting a crossover study with reasonable washout period? We do have an in vitro release method to determine lead-bound iron level in iron complex product. Can we provide some direct evidence to confirm generic products approved by current US standards don't have higher non-transferrin bound iron level than the reference products in vivo? So these questions actually propounded us to fund a research project in this area. In 2014, FDA solicited research studies to evaluate iron species in healthy subjects treated with generic and reference sodium ferric gluconate. This grant was awarded to Dr. Sarah Michael and James Pauly from University of Maryland. In this project, the researchers developed a size exclusion LC method coupled with inductively coupled plasma mass spectroscopy, abbreviated as ICP-MS, to directly measure the drug-bound iron. So this method can also simultaneously quantify other iron species through an inline UV visible detector. Here, I really want to congratulate this research group, this University of Maryland group. For the first time, actually, drug-bound iron can be directly measured along with other iron species. And here I listed the reference. You can refer to this reference to know more details about this analytical method. In addition, in this research project, a single dose crossover study to compare levels of NTBI and other iron species between reference and generic sodium ferric gluconate was conducted in healthy volunteers. The data suggested that there's no significant differences observed between generic and the brand sodium ferric gluconate in total iron and transferrin bound iron, drug bound iron, and non-transferrin bound iron levels. Also, 14 to 28 days seem to be a reasonable washout period in a crossover B study for iron complex products based on observed ferritin and the total iron binding capacity levels. So these research outcomes provided additional options for bioequivalent study design of iron complex products. Here is an updated product-specific guidance for ferric oxyhydroxide NDA 21135, previously known as iron sucrose. I highlighted the main areas we made changes in yellow. First, it is about the active ingredient name changed to ferric oxyhydroxide. Second, the study can be either parallel or crossover design. And third, as of analyze to measure, an option to directly measure drug-bound iron is added, and the B limits can be based on iron in ferric oxyhydroxide chloride in serum. Lastly, I want to highlight some global regulatory efforts which help the development of generic nanomedicine products. I think as previous speakers mentioned, actually we have been making good use of IPRP, Nanomedicine Working Group, to share some non-confidential application information, promote potential consensus on standards, collaborate on training. Actually, Anne and I are co-chairs for this working group. We initiated a Room Nano series, and one thing actually we focused this year is scientific and regulatory considerations for generic and follow-on nanomedicines. Also, Global Bioequivalence Harmonization Initiative Workshop is another platform for regulators, academic and industry scientists to exchange thinking on bioequivalence requirements for nanomedicine. We had quite some debate at the meeting on EMA and FDA requirements on the doxorubicin hydrochloride liposome injection a couple of years ago, and reached some scientific consensus at that platform. Also, for the generic drug cluster and FDA EMA parallel scientific advice pilot program, Sarah has provided some details in her presentation, so I will not be repeating those information here. Here, I just want to say, like, some parental nanomedicine applications were discussed at the generic drug cluster meetings, and confidential application information can be exchanged at the generic drug cluster meeting if there is a confidentiality agreement in place between agencies. In summary, non-oral nanomaterials are considered complex drug products, and there are limited number of generics available for these products. In the past 2 years, continued progress has been made in the regulatory research, guidance development, and application approval of complex generic drug products containing nanomaterials. Within FDA, we have established a streamlined process to identify research needs, translate research results to guidance development, and facilitate approval of complex generic drug products containing nanomaterials. Also, global regulatory collaborations in different platforms, such as IPRP Nanomedicine Working Group, GBHI, Generic Drug Cluster, and others, has helped accelerated such progress and harmonization of regulatory recommendations for complex generic drug products containing nanomaterials. Finally, I would like to acknowledge my colleagues from Office of Research and Standards, Office of Generic Drugs, Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, and the University of Maryland, who have contributed to the work I presented here. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Wenli. Thank you so much for your presentation. Very comprehensive work over the past years. And you also for syncing it with Sarah Ibrahim, sorry. The question box currently doesn't have any new questions. So I would say it is about time to move into the debate room. However, I believe Beat Löffler, our champion, organizer, and everything of Clinam, wants to say a few words if I have gotten his message correctly. Beat, are you there?
It's absolutely correct, Frank. I'm the man of the family. So I just wanted to thank you all very, very much that you have been with us all day. We had excellent moments in this conference. We have learned a lot, and Clinam is only possible due to all our speakers and participants. And we really worship this a lot. And Wenli, if you ever meet in Basel again, I will give you another handkerchief.
Yeah, thank you, Beat. Good to see you here. Yeah.
Great. All the best to all of you. Thank you also, Sarah, that you have been with us. It is a privilege to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
All the
having me.
best.
Again,
That was it.
to
Now
all the
you go to
presenters.
the Zoom room, and we
Yes.
hope that we will have a discussion.
All right, let's
the
switch to
best.
the Zoom room for the speakers. The link is pasted in the chat. The others know where to get. So let's switch to the debate.